When it comes to cutting sheet metal or thin plate, there are lots of options available in the blacksmith shop. Some low-tech, some high-tech. Now we have looked at some of these options in the past, things like the Beverly shear, cutting sheet metal with a chisel, probably even talked about torches in the past. But today I thought I would review a few of these tools just to refresh our memory on what some of the options are, and then take a look at a new tool that's come into the shop provided by today's sponsor, Vevor. Now on the low-tech end of the spectrum, we have chisels. Not only the simplest thing to come by, but also the most affordable in most cases. You can make chisels, you can use exotic steels. It costs a little bit more, but has properties that make it more desirable. Or you can make chisels out of an old piece of coil spring that you can usually get for free. There's probably 6 or 7 chisels left in this piece of coil spring, and you can make what you need, whether that's a single bevel chisel or a double bevel chisel, straight chisels, curved chisels, big chisels, little chisels, all sorts of different chisel varieties that you can make. You can even make chisels with metal rod handles. This is one I like to use under the treadle hammer, or with wooden handles, which is very traditional. These can be used at the anvil with a hand hammer, used under the treadle hammer. One of the advantages to using a chisel over so many of the other methods is that it leaves a very clear sign that you used a chisel to cut the work. And that can be desirable in a lot of things if that cut edge is going to be part of the finished design, going to show in the final piece. A chisel might be the way to go. It leaves a nice little bevel, leaves some little facets on there, and it can really add a lot to your work. Chisel also tends to upset the edges of the work. So while you're cutting a chisel line here, the work is kind of curving up away, and it gives more volume and form to your work. So a chisel is probably one of the more desirable ways to cut things from both an aesthetic point of view and from a financial point of view. Unfortunately, from an efficiency point of view, it's probably one of the worst ways. Although you can cut anything from thin sheet metal to half-inch plate. Theoretically, you could cut 1-inch plate with a chisel. Just got to plan to spend a long time doing it. If you're working with really thin material, a pair of snips might be the way to go. They're really convenient. You can cut circles. They make some of these in left-right curves, make circle cutting easier, or cutting around different shapes easier. But even the straight ones can do a lot. I used to make a lot of roses out of old real estate signs, and I just use a pair of snips. They're perfectly suited for this. Either the little aircraft snips or just a plain old pair of tin snips will get the job done. The other ones have mechanical advantage, but these work as well. These didn't just come in little sizes. There were some that were meant to be mounted on your anvil, and they're great big. Some of them might have even taken 2 people to operate because the handle was so long that the person controlling the work might not have been able to actually run the handle. Lots more leverage, lots more mechanical advantage. Now, I'm not sure how practical these things are or how heavy a material you can really cut with them, but they do work and they do have some functionality, and they look great hanging on the wall. Now, as things start to get a little bit more intricate, larger production runs, a Beverly shear or similar shear is really a handy way to go. For most of my shearing needs for sheet metal, this is what I'm going to use. It's great for cutting out shovel pans, large flower elements, things like that. Mine is the B3. The B2 would be okay, and I think the B1, if they make a B1, would probably be a little bit on the weak side for most of the things you'd want it for in a blacksmith shop. Now, of course, you can cut sheet metal with an angle grinder and a cutoff disc. Pretty good for straight cuts, not real good for curves, although you can to some extent work a curve with a little bit of practice. But it's a pretty handy thing. If you don't have a lot of other options, there are some techniques that will help you cut some curved things, and then if you clean it up with a file, you can do quite a bit of work with an angle grinder. Another power tool option would be something like the portaband, a little bandsaw, or a large metal cutting bandsaw. You can cut much more intricate shapes, do a whole lot of things with a bandsaw, and a little bandsaw like that will even cut some pretty heavy material. I do things at 1/2 inch to 1 inch quite regularly in it. Not anything real big. It is time consuming to use a little portaband like that, but it does get the job done, and it's awfully handy in the shop. If you're set up with an oxy-fuel torch for heating or welding, brazing, something like that, you probably have a cutting torch that goes with that. If you have the right tips, this can do some amazing things. It can be a little bit crude at times and certainly takes some skill development to use this effectively, but you can do a lot and you can cut some pretty heavy stuff with a cutting torch that is far outside the cutting range of any of the shears, tin snips, chisels, things like that. And it's something that most people are going to want in their shops. So a cutting torch is probably a good addition to your arsenal if you have a torch set up. To just buy a cutting torch for cutting a few parts out might be a little expensive. You got to have regulators, hoses, torch body, various tips, and of course you got to pay for oxygen and either acetylene or propane depending on how you want to set your system up. That brings us to the high-tech end of the spectrum, and at the top end would be CNC operated plasma cutters, lasers, water jet machines, real high-tech stuff, real precise, great for industry. Some people have some smaller setups in their shop. I don't have any CNC equipment, and I doubt that I ever will, so I can't really speak on how that would be in a small shop. But I know there are people out there with smaller laser and plasma cutters in their shop. There are probably even some small water jet cutters that you can fit into a small blacksmith shop. My guess is they're pretty pricey, though. Our friends over at Vevor have sent us a little plasma cutter to try out. This is a budget-friendly machine, about the cheapest you can buy a plasma cutter. It is their Cut 50P model, and that means it's got a 50 amp current on the cutting side. The P is for pilot arc. Now, I have not used a plasma cutter in years. 20 plus years ago, I had a little plasma cutter. It was rated to cut 1/8 inch material, and it did that poorly. It wasn't bad for 16 gauge material, but 1/8 inch is what I really wanted it for, so I bought one rated for 1/8 inch. Maybe the high dollar machines do better at their peak capacity, but the one I had wasn't that good. I didn't use it that much, so I finally sold it. And now when we do projects, a lot of people say, why don't you just use a plasma cutter? Well, it's because I haven't had a plasma cutter until today. So let's unbox the Cut 50P from Vevor and see what it'll do. Well, it's a cute little thing. We'll see what it can do. I'm glad it includes a regulator. So the regulator comes with a little bracket, and it shows 2 little holes in the back of the machine to mount this to. I don't see those 2 little holes. I wonder if I can just drill them and put a nut in. But it is a bargain machine, so we'll see. I took the cover off of this to make sure I'm not drilling into any of the circuitry. Providing the Teflon tape for the threaded connections was a nice touch, but all in all, I wish they'd had the mounting screws for the regulator in. Wasn't a big deal to do that, but it always makes me nervous to have to drill holes in a brand new machine with delicate electronics. Now, I think it bears mentioning that my general philosophy is to buy good tools. It pays to buy the best tool that you can, so you're a little bit happier with it, you go a little further. The other side of that coin is sometimes you buy a tool that turns out you didn't need so bad. And if you buy the cheap tool, it will tell you, do you need the good tool or did you not need that tool at all? So sometimes it's worth buying the cheap tool. I'm not saying you should run right out and buy a budget-friendly plasma cutter or that this will do everything that the high-dollar plasma cutters will do. But if this is what's in your budget and you need it occasionally, like I will probably only need it occasionally, I think this is worth looking at. Well, this little thing does work, and for the size that it is, I'm kind of impressed that it will actually cut half-inch steel. It does a lousy job cutting half-inch steel, at least at the settings I had. I'm sure if I played with the settings a little bit more, maybe got higher air pressure, who knows if it would cut better or not, but it seemed to do better with a lower air pressure. Now the gauge on this thing is a little bit odd. One, they don't have any pressure recommendations in the owner's manual, so I got to kind of figure that out or go online and see what I can find. But it's in megapascals. I've never heard of a megapascal before, but I went and looked, and 75 psi on your air compressor is about 0.5 megapascals, and I was between 0.4 and 0.7 trying different things out. So I was probably in the right range for air pressure. Had it turned all the way up on a 220 circuit, which it said was 52 amps, rated at 51. Whether it's really putting that much out, you never know on some of these import machines. A lot of times they're underpowered compared to their ratings. But it did cut, and it cut the 1/8 inch a lot easier and a little bit more cleanly. And 1/4 inch it didn't do too bad. 3/8 it did okay with. 1/2 inch was just really pushing its luck, which doesn't surprise me. My experience with plasma cutters in the past really has been that whatever its maximum rating is theoretical, and you probably don't ever want to go more than about 75% of that maximum thickness. This is a $200 plasma cutter. Some of those other brands are $2,000 or $3,000 depending on what model you want and what capabilities you want it to have. So if you only have a use for a plasma cutter occasionally, this may not be a bad way to go. But like so many things, you kind of get what you paid for. I had to put screws in the back of this to hold the regulator because there was no place to mount the regulator, even though the instruction manual showed you that there was a place to mount the regulator. And you shouldn't have to do that with a new machine. The instructions are a little bit vague on settings, but if you know how to use a plasma cutter, you've been using one, you probably have a little bit of an intuitive feel for whether you need to turn the power up or down. After I use this for a while, I'll probably get used to that. Hopefully the tips for this are universal. I'm going to have to go to my local welding supplier, take the spares that were provided, there were some spares provided luckily, and see if they have replacements for the consumables. If not, that might be a problem. Now there is a lot of dross and there's going to be some cleaning up, but it's still a lot cleaner than I usually get with a cutting torch, so it's an improvement in that regard, and I think in a lot of ways it's easier to set up and use than a cutting torch. But a cutting torch is still an option if you don't have a plasma cutter. And a cutting torch, if you have different size tips, is widely varied in what it'll cut. Heck, with most torches, 1/2 inch plate is well within their capacity. Probably even cut 1 inch if you've got a big enough torch and enough gas to supply it. But I think this is a little bit cleaner, and I think it's got a little bit more potential for doing more intricate things that pretty sure with my skills with a cutting torch, I would just burn it off. And I used to be pretty good with a cutting torch. So once again, I would like to thank Vevor for helping make these videos at Black Bear Forge possible. Sponsors really do help finance the whole production effort of making videos, and it's fun to play with the little tools, even if it's not something I will use on a regular basis. But I am sure that I will use it a little bit here and there. So this isn't something I'm going to get rid of. I'm going to hold on to it. So thanks, Vevor. Thank you, each and one of you, for watching. Hope you have time in your day to get out to your shop. Make something, but stay safe. Wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next video. I've never heard of a megapascal. I've never heard of a megapascal. I can't even pronounce megapascal.